Go back to Genesis 37. I'm going to start at verse 16. You can see it up here on the screen. Vayomer eth achai anoki mivakesh. He responded, I am seeking my brothers. Reveal to me where they are shepherding. Now, as we look at this, Vayomer's Cal imperfect third masculine singular, Vayiktol from Amer. Achai has the word brothers, plural. We know that because it's not ahi. Ahi would have a first common singular pronominal suffix on it with a yod and a hirik. But in the plural noun, brothers, then that hirik changes to a pathak. The reason for that is it is taking the form here that would be achhe. You add a yod on it for the hirik. If you put the hirik here, then that makes a nonsensical form. They don't like the two yods together at the end, so they take this off, combine the hirik here with the tsere, and the hirik and the tsere together become a pathak. That pathak is the sign that the noun is plural instead of a hirik. A hirik tells you the noun is singular. The pathak tells you the noun is plural. And the suffix is first common singular. So it's my brothers, plural. Anoki, the personal pronoun, first common singular. Mivakesh is a piel participle, masculine singular, from bakash. Hagida is a hiphil imperative, masculine singular. It has a kametz he suffix on it that is merely an inflection that is to show a sense of urgency. So it's a hiphil imperative, masculine singular, from the root nagad, nun gimel daleth. Nagad means to make known. In the hiphil, it means to make known, to reveal, to disclose, to tell. The na is not necessary to translate, but if you translate here as please, it fits well in this context. It's a good case for arguing for please as its meaning in those cases where you have an inferior speaking to a superior, 17-year-old boy speaking to a man. Li, the lamed preposition, plus the first common singular pronominal suffix, to me. Apho, the adverb, interrogative adverb, where. Haim, third masculine plural pronoun, personal pronoun. Ro'im is from the verb ra'ah, resh ayin he. Ro'im is a cal, active participle, masculine plural. Questions on verse 16? Chad.
In our graded translations, if you underline in red...
If I underline in red, that means I'm pleased, very pleased with your translation. Okay? Verse 17, if no other questions on 16?
One question.
Yes.
Regarding that last verb, tending.
Yes.
Was how I had translated that. That I think the... Oh, I understand. Never mind.
The light dawns. Okay. Verse 17 begins with Vayomer. I'm not going to parse it anymore. You should have that so well known that it should be dreamed about at night. And you should begin every conversation Vayomer when you're talking about what someone else said. Okay. Vayomer ha'ish nasa'u mizeh. The man replied, they departed from here. Nasa'u is a cal perfect, third common plural from nasa, nun samak ayin. It could be translated as a started out, depart. In some context it is march. Obviously in this context it's not marched. These aren't soldiers going out to war. These are shepherds tending their sheep. They don't march. Mizeh, literally from this. I think at least one of you tried to translate it from this place. Well, that's more or less the idea. And you did put correctly the place or location in italics. But it's really just an idiom for here. from here. Ki shama'ati, because. He's offering an explanation of how he knows this. Shama'ati is the Cal perfect, first common singular from shama. I heard omrim. Omrim is a Cal active participle, masculine plural. It has to agree with the gender and number of its subject. That's his brothers, those men, as far as this man's concerned. And so it's, I heard them saying. We have to add the them contextually to indicate the subject of the participle. You do not have to put it in italics because that subject is what's indicated by the plural masculine ending of the participle. It's used as a verbal participle here. I heard them saying, nailka, dotanya. Nailka is a Cal imperfect, first common plural from halak, hey, lamed, and kaf sofit. All right, from halak. The comet's hey ending indicates that it is a cohortative. As a cohortative, they are mutually exhorting one another for this action. So it's let's go. Let us go. Let's go. The comet's hey on any first common plural imperfect will be a cohortative ending. And it's let's go. Dotayana, notice the a suffix on dotan. Dotan is the place name. The a suffix is the hey directive or hey locative. Let us go to Dothan or let us go into Dothan. In this context with all the sheep, it's probably best to keep it as let's go to Dothan. You could legitimately argue for translating it, let's go toward Dothan, in the sense of Dothan word, going toward Dothan. Wayelek Yosef achar echal. So Joseph went after his brothers. Wayelek is a Cal imperfect, third masculine singular from halak. It's a wayik tol form. And he found them. I just translate the and here instead of trying to put in more thens or thuses or so's. When you have them so close together and the actions so close together, one or two of those ands is not going to cause any problem. And he found them in Dothan. Wayim Tsaim is a Cal imperfect, third masculine singular from matzah, and it has a third masculine plural pronominal suffix on it. That's the aim on it. It's third masculine plural pronominal suffix. All right? Any questions on verse 17? Yes, Kelly.
Could you translate it as and then to still show sequence but not...
No, that's redundant. That's translating the same word twice.
I say and then.
Right, just translate either as and or then, but not both. Okay?
How about so?
So is fine just by itself, but not and so. Okay? Anyone else? All right, verse 18. Verse 18. Wayira'u oto meirachok. Please note the athnak under meirachok. The athnak marks the logical middle of the verse. Therefore, if you're going to use any punctuation that breaks up this verse, this is where it goes. All right? Wayira'u is a Cal imperfect, third masculine plural, from ra'ah, he saw. Resh, aleph, hey. So they saw him. Oto, it's the accusative marker eighth, plus the third masculine singular pronominal suffix. It's the direct object. So they saw him, or then they saw him, meirahok, from afar. from a distance. The me is the min preposition meaning from. The nun is normally assimilated to the first letter of the word to which it is attached, and a doubling dogish is inserted in order to note that assimilation. Resh is a guttural. It rejects the doubling. Therefore, you do not have a doubling dogish, and to compensate for that rejection, the hirik that is normally under min is changed to a tsere, merahok. Then they saw him from a distance. But before he approached them, before he drew near to them, before he arrived at them, before he came to them, all those are legitimate translations. Uv terem is literally and in before. And before. Because it's a wow on a non-verb in a sentence that has a verb, yikrav, it's a disjunctive clause, and it can be a contrast. And here I would take it as a contrast, but before he drew near. Yikrav, cal imperfect, third masculine singular from karav. To them. This is the preposition el. It's inflected like this with its tsere yod. If you go back and recheck your prepositions with pronominal suffixes in your textbook, it has a third masculine plural pronominal suffix. It's literally to them or unto them. Wayithnaklu. Wayithnaklu is a hithpael. It's a hithpael, imperfect, third masculine plural from nakal. Nakal. Nakal, as you found out in looking at the lexicon, can mean to devise a plot, to act or behave cunningly or shrewdly, deceitfully. It has the idea in this type of context of conspire. That is to act wickedly against someone, to plot evil against someone. We use in English normally the word conspire. They conspired oto against him. Because if you're going to use conspire, it takes in English against with it. And so the accusative is taken as against. They conspired against him to kill him. Lahimito is a hifil infinitive construct with a lamed preposition and with a third masculine singular pronominal suffix. Remember, infinitives are to something, especially infinitive constructs, and this is to kill him. So let me read this this verse one more time. Then they saw him from a distance, semicolon, or a comma. But before he drew near to them, they conspired against him to kill him. The wa on wayith naklu is not translated because we have a temporal clause that precedes it that is introducing it. Before he drew near to them, they conspired. So the way on wayith nakalu is not translated. Okay? Questions? Yes, George.
What was the root letters for the last word to kill him?
The root letters are mem, wow, tau. It's the verb mut, to kill. Middle vowel verb. Jeff.
I missed that. On not cal, why don't you, what's the reason for not translating the wa?
For not translating the wa is because of the temporal clause preceding it. Before he drew near to them. That is a subordinate clause. It's not a complete sentence. So you can't say and after it because then you're leaving that incomplete sentence. And it's not a sentence. It's a temporal clause defining, modifying the following verb. It modifies the following verb. Ubeterem yikrav elechem belongs with wayithnak kalu. It does not belong with wayira'u oto merahok. Note the athnak. Okay? Kyle.
Is there any significance with that last word not being harag?
No. It's just mut is a common term used for killing or putting to death.
Okay.
In fact, you could have translated to put to death, to put him to death. Chad?
Theorem after the afnek. Would you say again, please, how we know that's a disjunctive clause?
It's a wow plus a non-verb.
Wow plus a non-verb is always a disjunctive.
Disjunctive clause, correct. And a disjunctive clause has two purposes primarily. Number one is contrast. Number two is to give background information. In this case, it seems to be a contrast between the two actions. All right, anyone else? Yes, Chad.
One more if I may. On
Sure.
Not Cal. Holiday doesn't list conspire as a gloss for that verb, so...
That would just come from your general English knowledge, or if you happen to look at another lexicon that would have conspire in it. But I think he does, doesn't he give to plot? Yeah, to plot deceitfully. In English we say conspire for that. I don't know why he used plot deceitfully. That's a... I was reading an article last night, an essay last night, just before going to bed, by Takamitsu Muraoka on lexicography for the Septuagint, and he's preparing a new lexicon for the Septuagint. And he was talking about the way lexicons are counterintuitive. Normally, they don't provide adequate information for someone to do adequate translation. They supply a gloss that they perceive as giving the meaning, but don't offer any explanation and don't offer an adequate number of synonyms so that a person can understand it. And he said this is especially, and it's not talking about Chad here, but he says it's especially critical because today, in the world we live in, English language lexicons are being read by many people who do not speak English as a first language. And so those words that are automatic need to be included, like conspire here. Needs to be included. Because when we say plot deceitfully, that's very awkward. We never say that. He plotted deceitfully to kill the president. We say they conspired to kill the president. So it's something we have to learn to watch out for. And when you see those types of phrases, try to think of the common English phrases you would use yourself and go for them. I didn't count off any points. I put a question mark under all the variety of translation used, unless it was really way out. I didn't count anything off, but I circled it and put a question mark, and then I highlight it and put in the margin, at least electronically, I put in the margin the idea of conspire. But that's how we get to it. And it's not your fault, it's the lexicon's fault. It's the way the lexicon put together. When I read that in Muraoka, I said, man, he knows what he's talking about. He's going to have a good lexicon.
He's writing one now?
He's writing one, yes. A new lexicon on the Septuagint. They've published one fascicle of it on the prophets so far, and now he's working on the Pentateuch.
So it's just some late bedtime reading?
That's right. Yep. Okay. And in my bathroom, I have the large IVP dictionary of the historical books of the Bible, and I'm reading the articles in it. So it's heavy reading. And that's because it must weigh 5 pounds, this big, thick thing. All right, anyone else? Other questions? I don't dare try to go to sleep reading it. It would crush me. All right, let's go on to verse 19 then. Verse 19, Vayomru, that's just the masculine plural of Vayomer. Ish el ahi. Ish el ahi is an idiom. Literally it says, each or a man unto his brother. It's an idiom that means to each other. They said to each other. They said to one another. All right, so it's an idiomatic thing, and you'll notice there I wrote an M, a capital M there to tell you it's an idiom, and it means to each other. Hine ba'al hachalomot halazeh ba. Behold, literally. You can use behold, you can use look, or you can just leave it off. Ba'al hachalomot is another idiom. Literally, it means one who has mastery over dreams. And so it's just used as an idiom of dreamer. Halazeh means this dreamer. Look, this dreamer is coming. Ba. Now that's if you take ba as a cal active participle masculine singular, which I do. Some take it as a cal perfect third masculine singular and translate it as look, this dreamer comes. Either one is acceptable. The ba can be parsed both ways. Any questions on verse 19?
Can you repeat the translation?
Yes. So they said to one another, look, this dreamer is coming. And then you do not break here. Remember, you're using paragraphs in your translation. They continue speaking, so you don't have a new paragraph here. Verse 20 continues right on the end of it. Don't put punctuation, a double quote at the end of verse 19 because they're still talking. Ve'ata leku v'nacharagehu. And now. And you can just say, therefore. I prefer therefore here. Therefore, let's kill him immediately. Leku is a cal imperative masculine plural from halak. It is an introductory imperative. It's not intended to be translated. It has the idea of urgency or immediacy. When nahar gehu is a cal imperfect first common plural from harag with a third masculine singular pronominal suffix on the end and a conjunction on the front. Let's kill him. By context, we can tell that this is a cohortative. They are enjoining one another to this action. It's not we will kill him. It's not like a prophecy. They're saying let's kill him. Let's kill him immediately. Leku. Ve'ata is often used in situations where it is summarizing the preceding context and meaning therefore. It's like un in Greek or araun in Greek. Yes?
You say it's an imperative?
Leku is an imperative. Leku is a cal imperative masculine plural. Wanashlikehu is a hiphil imperfect first common plural from shalak with a kaf on the end of it, not a chayth. It sounds like it, but it's different. It's this verb, not this verb. This verb, shalak, is to throw or to cast. Shalach is to reach, to send, or to stretch out. And let's cast him, because it has a third masculine singular pronominal suffix on it, in or into, achad in construct, haborot, noun with a definite article, into one of the pits or one of the cisterns. By context, we have to translate this as cistern. I'll talk about it a little bit more when we get down a little bit further where it becomes a little bit more significant. But this would be the cisterns by context. And we will say, Ve'amernu is a cal perfect first common plural from amer. Chaya, a living creature, a beast, an animal. Ra'ah. This is not an evil animal. It's not morality being talked about. It is the idea of a wild animal. This is an idiom for a wild animal. One of you translated it as ferocious animal. That is legitimate to take it as ferocious. Some prefer that. Most prefer to see it as the idiom meaning wild animal. But in either way, it's not an evil animal. It is either wild or ferocious. A ferocious animal, a wild animal, ekalathu, a cal, perfect, third feminine singular. That's why the tau is there. Who is the third masculine singular pronominal suffix? It's third feminine singular because chayara'a is feminine and it's singular. A wild animal has eaten him, has consumed him, has devoured him. Wanira'eh This is a kal imperfect, first common plural from ra'ah. And we will see ma, what, ye hayu. Kal imperfect, third masculine plural from haya. The verb to be in the perfect is a verb talking about a state of being. When it's in the imperfect, it's a state of becoming or transition or happening. What will happen with Helomotao, his dreams? Questions on verse 20? Scott.
Two questions. First, regarding the evil and wild on Ra'ah. The lexicon doesn't appear to give any indication of that. How do we get to that?
Let me check what he does with it here. Part of that's just part of your instruction and introduction and part of what I give you during the translation grading. It's on page 341. As you go down through ra, which is the adjective, of bad quality, inferior, disagreeable, unwholesome, ugly, bad, of no value, contemptible, bad-tempered, evil, morally depraved, disagreeable, displeasing, undesirable, annoying, objectionable, disapproved of, vicious, and harmful. Number 6, follow through there. Boils, Deuteronomy 28:35, wild animal, Genesis 37, verse 33.
Which page are you on? I'm sorry.
Page 341.
Thank you very much. Another question with regards to the parsing on Wamesh La Kahu. How did you parse that, please?
That is a hifil, imperfect, first common plural. We know it's a hifil because the hirik under the lamed and the pathik under the noon prefix. All right. Anyone else? Yes, Kenny.
The wild animals is not in bold then?
No, it's not in bold.
You instructed us.
It's right. I've told you to be careful of that, but it is sufficient here. If you are following that, you have a choice of using either vicious, like ferocious, or wild. But it's a wild animal. It's normally, and if I were doing the lexicon, wild animal would be in bold because that is the idiom. Right. Yeah. Okay.
For just the word Chayam.
Wild is not in bold in my copy.
Wild predatory animals.
Yours is in bold? Okay, great. I have an earlier edition perhaps, and maybe Kenny does too, because mine isn't in bold. If it's in bold now, then that's good. That's a good change.
It's not confusing.
Oh, it's just your computer, huh? Maybe they changed it there because it's not in the printed. Not in the printed. But if on the computer copy, if that's from Logos, Bible Works, maybe they've gone through and done some editing. Someone's done some smart editing if it's bold, because that's good.
Well,
yes,
that's what kind
John.
of confused me because and then there's probably another number of reasons why I shouldn't translate it this way, but I put wild animals pasturing because Hayai had wild animals, and then I saw raw there, and I thought, well, it's not going to be redundant, so.
But pasturing doesn't make any sense in the context.
Well, and I put roaming, so like,
Yeah.
I don't know.
It doesn't really fit. It's an adjective defining the animal. So if you said wild animal, I mean, chaya by itself isn't a wild animal.
Right. It just threw me, and I added extra.
Right. Yeah, you did add. You double translated.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Anyone else? Anyone else? Any other questions on verse 20? All right. Let's go to verse 21. Vayishma Reuven. Then Reuben heard. Vayatzilehu. And he tried to deliver him miyadam, from their hand. Vayomer, he said, and I'm not translating the way here because I don't think it's necessary, or you could do it as so he said, or then he said, lo nakenu nafesh. Let's not kill him. Let's not put him to death. Let's not take his life. Let's not, can't think of another way to translate it right now. if you say his, put his in italics, because there is no third masculine singular pronominal suffix on nafesh. It's not nafsho. And naka, the nun, kaf, hey verb that is used here means literally to smite, to strike. In this context, when you smite or strike a soul, you are taking a life, you are killing. And so that's the way it should be translated. You could also say murder him and take the him for nafesh. And then you don't have to put him in italics, because nefesh can refer to a person. It can be translated as self in different ways. All right, so Wayishma is a kal imperfect, third masculine singular from Shama. Wayatzilehu is a hiphil imperfect, third masculine singular from Natsal, with a third masculine singular pronominal suffix. Miyadam has the min preposition, and it has a third masculine plural pronominal suffix. Nakenu, I believe here is to be taken, and I need to double check this because the pointing can go two ways. See how Holiday gives it. It is a imperfect first common plural. Yes, it will be hiphil. Because they don't list any PL and no cal. So it's a hiphil. It's a hiphil imperfect first common plural with a third masculine singular pronominal suffix. And that takes care of 21. Verse 21, anyone else? Any other questions on verse 21? Okay, let's rush to verse 22. Wayomer Elehem, he said to them. Here I don't translate the wow because it's just continuing, the same person is still speaking, all right? And it also continues the same paragraph. Same speaker, same paragraph. So verse 21, 22 belong in the same paragraph. I would also think very strongly about keeping it with verse 20. He said, Reuben said to them, because you have Reuven here, Reuben said to them, do not. It changes here to a second masculine plural verb. It's no longer we. He's talking directly to the other brothers. And he uses al. Al is used when you have a jussive. So it's do not. It's a mild imperative. It's a pleading with. Do not shed blood. Hashliku is a hiphil imperative masculine plural from shalak. Cast him, oto, the object, direct object, el habor hazeh, into this cistern, esher bamidbar, which is in the wilderness. Weyad al tishlachuvo, but do not lay a hand on him. Disjunctive clause, wow plus non-verb, followed by the jussive verb in the cal imperfect, second masculine plural. The direct object is bo, but here if you translate it as to lay a hand on him, notice hand is singular, it's not hands. Lay a hand on him, we keep the on. If you say put a hand on him, you still keep it. If you say reach out to him, or I don't know how else to put it. If you say stretch out a hand on him, it just doesn't sound very good in English. We say lay a hand on. Lema'an, in order, hatzil, to deliver. Here you have the explanation. You have the end of his quotation where the athnak is. So the double quote's there. A comma inside the double quote, because the last phrase here is an adverbial modifying phrase, a modifying clause. It is not a sentence. It cannot stand by itself, and therefore it's part of the preceding sentence. So put a comma inside the end of the double quotes, in order to deliver him from their hand. To return him, la heshivo, el avi, to his father. Hatzil, hiphil, infinitive construct, without any prefix on it and without any suffix on it. Shivo is also a hiphil infinitive construct from shuv, middle vowel verb, It has a lamed prefix, and it has a third masculine singular pronominal suffix. It's from shuv. Any questions on verse 22? Yes, James.
Where would you put the punctuations when you have like to return, to rescue? Would you just continue the sentence on without any punctuations there?
You could put a comma after that, but I wouldn't put anything. It's to rescue him from their hand, to return him to his father. Either a comma after the first one or nothing. Okay? Jan?
Translation one more time.
One more time, yes. He said, Reuben said to them, do not shed blood. Cast him or throw him into this cistern which is in the wilderness, but do not lay a hand on him. End of the quotation, comma, double quotes. In order to deliver him from their hand, to return him to his father. Before I move on to the rest of Genesis 37 and Deuteronomy 5, let me get to the exam so that you make certain that you have your notes on it. Number one, remember, is translation and vocabulary in Genesis 37. Please be prepared on that. Number two is remember the classifications for the weak verbs. The classifications for weak verbs. This is very important for you to go back and remember what we covered here. Go back into chapter 26 and following in your textbook and make certain that you have looked at this and understand what a weak verb is and what are the different classifications and types of weak verbs. You will be given a chart that is very similar to what you see here, except on the left side here you will not have anything in it, and over here the letters will not be in individual boxes. You'll be given a verb and you'll be asked to identify it, and you will have to give its identification by both systems. For example, if I give you a cow, he ate, you would identify it as a pay guttural or pay aleph or one guttural or one aleph. All right? Now, you don't have to have all four of those because some of those are just the same thing. Pay guttural or pay aleph is basically the same there. So, but you should be able to identify it by means of the Roman numerals and by the pay ayin lamed type of paradigm. Yes? We've got them all up here right now. You've got the aleph, kaf, lamed. Notice it's in the pay column. It's the pay letter. It's the first letter. So that's a pay guttural or pay aleph. And if you go down, you have ma'as. You have the aleph is in the middle. Therefore, it's an ayin guttural. If you have the aleph at the end, it's a lamed guttural or a lamed aleph. And if you do the same thing, if you have an aleph first, in this system, it's a one guttural, or one aleph. Here you have nachal. Nachal is a second guttural, but nachal can also be, remember, a one noon, because you have pay noon or one noon verbs. Shamah, the ayin, is in the third guttural slot. So it'd be third guttural or lamed guttural. Jeff?
For on there, can I say one guttural or I have to say one guttural or aleph or one aleph?
You have to say one guttural and pay guttural or pay aleph. I want you to use the two systems. But if there's two ways to refer to it in the same system, I'm only asking for one of those. So if there's an or here, it's either or. Okay?
Except, but if it's a noon, I have to identify it. It's like a two noon.
Right. Yes, because it's not a guttural. Yes?
Is it only going to be given in the cal through masculine singular form?
All of them will be cal perfect masculine singular forms. All of them. It'll be the root words that'll be used. So as we went through here, remember before it changes there to a red as I go through and work on this, but that's basically just going through and making certain that you understand that system. And if you go back to your textbook, you have this all explained to you on page 156. You have the same charts, the same references on page 156 that will help you through that. And then as you go page after that, each of the divisions are so arranged. For example, notice on page 157 at 1B, it's one guttural, parenthesis, pay guttural. There's both systems of classification. And then notice the huge list of verbs that fit into that. The huge list of verbs that fit into that. I'm not asking you to memorize the verbs, I'm just asking you to be able to classify. And then on page 158, at 2B, you have the one yod or pay yod, or the one wow or pay wow. And then you had the pay wow proper, you had the pay yod on the bottom of page 159. You have the pay yod or pay wow on page 160, the pay noon on page 161. On chapter 27, you go to the second root letter, and on page 164, you have the second guttural or ayin guttural verbs, and a list of examples there. On page 165, you have the middle vowel or two vowel verbs with examples there given to you with 7 examples. And then on page 166, you have the two double or geminate, and the ayin is the alternate way of referring to them verbs, like shamam, shadad, palal, savav, chanan, and halal. We have 6 of them given there for you as examples, not for you to memorize, just examples so you can understand the classification. And page 169, chapter 28, the third root letters, bottom of the page, third guttural or lamed guttural, and several examples, 6 examples given there. On page 171, the 3 aleph or lamed aleph, and with 7 examples given there. And on page 172, the third hay or lamed hay, with 7 examples given there. And then on, and that's it. Those are all the classifications. And so I'm just asking you, I'll give you a verb. You classify that verb by both systems. I will give you a chart, and I will put a sample of it for you so you can see clearly what I'm asking for. All right? Yes?
It's basically just identifying where the guttural is.
That's where the guttural is, or where other weak letters are, like the pay noon, the pay yod, for example. Correct. And the only classifications are the ones listed there is the major classifications in the textbook. There are no other classifications. And especially back there, what, on page 156? If you look at page 156, I believe all the classifications are given. No, it's missing 2, because I didn't give you the lamed hay or third hay, and I didn't give you the middle vowel. It has all the others. I don't know why. I'll have to, Dr. Busnes and I are working on revising this, and I don't know why we left that out. I'm going to put a note to myself here. But those are only ones missing in the chart on page 156.
Question for you.
It deals with nomenclature. Yes?
On the middle, the only things that we have other than the gutturals are the
Vowel.
The I
Full letter vowel.
and the I noon, and then the middle vowels.
One noon.
One noon and the one yod and the two vowel are the
Right.
only 3 non-gutturals that are included.
Right.
Okay.
Yes. Okay? All the other verbs are strong verbs. They're called strong verbs because they have all strong letters. No gutturals, no weaknesses. Okay? Now, one other thing. In your textbook, page 174. Page 174. There is a chart given to you. The chart helps you to recognize Hebrew roots when only 2 of the 3 root letters are visible. Memorize that chart. Memorize that chart. And I want you, whenever you're doing translation exercises, preparing translation from now on, I want you using the charts on page 174 and 175. The chart in the box is one type, and then the classification key on 2B on the bottom of page 174, the top of 175. That helps you to identify the verbs and the roots of verbs when you do not see all three root letters. The classification key is you look at a word and you say, okay, if the vowel of the imperfect prefix is apathic, then I stay here. If it's not, I go to 1.2. If the vowel of the imperfect prefix is a heroic, if it's not that, I go to 1.3. If the vowel of the imperfect prefix is a comet satuf, the form will normally be either, why do I say either hofal? Oh my, that is so, is normally hofal. Take the B either out. I think Brian Rickett brought that to our attention last year and we didn't get it changed. Bottom of page 174, 1.3. 1.3 will normally, the form will normally be hofal. Take off either. All right? But what I want you to do, when you're doing translation, keep page 174, 175 open. Anytime you find a verb form that has only 2 or 1 root letter showing, use these charts to identify the verb root and the form of the verb. All right? That's to help you. And in 603, when you're doing translation, I'll say the same thing. The best thing you can do to help you identify weak verbs where you do not have all 3 root letters showing is to have this chart open, have these pages open. Okay? Now, you're not able to use that on your exam. All right? You are asked to memorize that chart on the top of page 174, the box chart. Memorize that for the exam. Okay? So, out of the textbook, what do? Know how to classify verbs as the type of verbs they are, the type of weak verb they are. Then, number 2, memorize the chart on the top of page 74. The third thing is to know and be able to translate and recognize vocabulary of Genesis chapter 37. That is the totality of your exam. Okay? There'll be nothing else. John?
Well, within that Genesis going and translating, is there going to be parsing like we had on the last one?
Yes, there will be. I mentioned that on Tuesday. You will have parsing just like on exam number 1. You'll have a translation to do, and then there'll be boxes in the chart for you to fill in for parsing. And identification of suffixes and other things like that. Just exactly like, it'll be the same type of format as exam number 1. Except this exam is not going to have grammar questions like exam number 1. This exam is limited to translation and parsing and identification in Genesis 37 and to the weak verbs that I just assigned you on the identification of the weak verbs and on memorizing the chart on page 174. That's it. Nothing more.
Is this mainly up
Jeff?
to verse 25 or is this all the way?
All the way through the chapter. All the way through the chapter. Don't stop with verse 25. As I mentioned earlier, I'm not going to do 26 through the following with you. I'm leaving that to you to do and work on. And you can probably expect at least one of the verses to translate is going to be from that section. After verse 26. 26 and following. Okay? You'll have 3 verses to translate on the exam. There'll be 3 verses to translate on the exam out of chapter 37. Okay, any other questions on the exam?
We can't bring holiday with us.
You cannot bring holiday with you for this one, no. You will be allowed to use holiday on your final exam later in the year, but not for this one. Not for this one. Okay? Any other questions on the exam? All right, let's go back and finish up Genesis 37, 23 through 25 very quickly, and then go to Deuteronomy 5 so you're prepared for Dr. Grisanti on Thursday. Wayehi ka'esher ba Yosef el Echau. So it happened as Joseph came to his brothers, that they stripped Joseph of his tunic. Vayaf shitu eth Yosef eth kutanto. Eth ketonet hapasim, the fancy tunic, esher alau, which was on him. All right? Go over this again. Wayahi, cal imperfect, third masculine singular from haya. It's a wayik tol, so we begin it with so or then. Yahi is an imperfect of haya, therefore it's a state of becoming or transition or happening. And it happened, or so it came to pass. So it came to pass, so it happened. Ka is as. Esher is just a relative particle, but with ka, with the kaf, it still means as. As he was coming, ba. As Joseph was coming. El echau, to his brothers. Wayaf shitu is a hiphil imperfect third masculine plural from pe, shin, taith. Pashat means to strip. And here the wayik tol form, because it follows the temporal clause that began it, the same as I did on an earlier verse. I do not translate the wow on this because it's so it happened as Joseph was coming to his brothers, that is the way you'd introduce it in English, that they stripped Joseph. Notice Joseph et Yosef is the direct object. It is not the tunic. It's Joseph that's the direct object, first of all. The second object is the tunic. So it's they stripped Joseph of his tunic, the way we say it in English. And then in apposition, explaining what kind of tunic, the tunic literally with long sleeves, or the long flowing tunic, or the fancy tunic, or the expensive tunic. But don't put too many adjectives in there. You can't get too interpretive in your translation and add everything in. Choose one of those and stick with it. Keep it brief. And then esher alau, which was upon him. Which here would be, which was on him, not upon him, because he wasn't lying down sleeping and covered with it. It was, he was wearing it. And so in English we don't say my coat is upon me, we say my coat is on me. I have my coat on. Okay? So he's on. Anyone else? Any questions on that verse? Yes, James.
So can we use tunic instead of garment? Or
yes, you may. Either one, garment or tunic. They're both acceptable. I could have used garment here in my translation. Okay, they're interchangeable. Anyone else? Yes, Chad.
This is the second time in this passage we've seen a wayik tol preceded by a temporal clause.
Yes.
Is it always true that when the wayik tol is preceded by a temporal clause, you don't translate the wow?
That is correct. You do not translate the wow on it in that case. Keep that in mind for Ruth chapter 1. Okay, anyone else? Other questions on that verse, verse 23? Let's go to verse 24. Vayikahuhu vayashliku oto habora. So they seized him, literally, so they took him, and they threw him into the cistern. Haborah is into the cistern because the comet's hay ending is the hay directive, the hay locative. As we look at this verb, the verb as we see it here is a cal imperfect, third masculine plural, from lakach. From lakach. Lakach is the only verb beginning with a lamed in which the lamed is considered a weak letter, and it is treated as though it were an initial noon verb, and it is assimilated to the second root letter in the imperfect. That's why you have a dogish in the kof. This is not a nifal triangle. It looks like it. It is not. It is a cal imperfect, and the reason for the dogish is the lamed of lakach has been assimilated. The kibbutz under the chayth tells you it's a plural, and the hey shurik tells you it has a third masculine singular pronominal suffix. So they took him, so they seized him, and cast him and threw him. Wayashliku we had before. It's a Hifil imperfect, third masculine plural, from Shalak. And then at the end of this line we have Wehabor Reik Ein Bo Mayim. Notice the wow plus a non-verb. And in this case, there is no verb given, interestingly, but it will still be classified as an explanatory clause and be like a disjunctive clause, and it's parenthetical. You put it in parentheses. It explains, it defines what pit they're talking about and what the condition of that pit is. So parenthesis, the pit, don't translate the wow on it. The pit was empty, reik. Ein, there was not, bo, in it, water. In other words, it had no water in it, or it was without water. Okay? End of parentheses. Questions? Chad?
Earlier, I thought you said bore had to be translated cistern.
Yes, and it should be cistern here. Thank you for correcting me. You are right. And this is why it must be cistern. Because it is identifying that as a cistern that is empty. It normally would have water in it. It was for the purpose of having water in it. That's what makes it a cistern and not just a pit. It's this context, it's this statement in verse 24 that by context tells us that throughout this entire passage, we're not talking about a garbage pit. We're not talking about a pit that was dug to trap an animal. We're not talking about a pit that was dug for some other reason. It is a cistern for collecting water. Yes, Dennis. No, it's not the same as a well. A well is where you dig a hole in the ground and it fills with water from the ground, with groundwater. A cistern collects rainwater or it flows into it. A well is self-feeding. A cistern is fed from the exterior, from outside.
How deep was it?
It depended on the need and the area. At Masada, you can walk into the cisterns and stand in them and look high up at the ceiling because they're huge. Cisterns are also lined with lime plaster to hold the water in. You do not line a well. If you line a well, it becomes an empty well because it won't hold water. The water can't get in any longer. But a cistern is lined with plaster to keep the water in once it has run into it. It's to collect water, runoff water. Okay? So that's why it's here. Now, why is this a problem in Genesis 37? Because if you read the whole Joseph story, bore is a key word for the entire story that the writer Moses utilizes to tie the entire story together. Because you go back later to chapter 40 or 41 and you find him cast into another pit, another bore, the same Hebrew word, except you can't translate it there as pit either because it's a dungeon. It's the dungeon in the house of Potiphar, the officer of Pharaoh. And what it is it tells you that Joseph's life is the pits. He goes from one pit to another pit. All right? And you won't see that tie in the narrative unless you look at it in the Hebrew. But unfortunately in English, if we say pit for each of these, it ends up misdirecting the person who's reading it because they don't understand why we're saying pit to tie it together, and they think it's just a pit somewhere that they're tossing them into back in Genesis 40 and not a dungeon cell, or they think here it's not a cistern when it is. So you have to maintain that tie. All right? Verse 25, very quickly. Wayesh bu is from Yashav. It's a kal imperfect third masculine plural. It's wayikto. Le'ekal lechem. This is a kal infinitive construct with a lamed prefix, to eat food, not just bread. They weren't just eating bread. You can't demonstrate that. Lechem is an idiom used in the Hebrew to represent food in many cases, and only in some cases is it specifically bread. We'll see that also in Genesis.
You can always use food unless
Use food unless you can tell specifically by context that it's bread. Correct. Wayisa'u is a wayikto, kal imperfect, third masculine plural, from a pei noon or one noon verb. It is from nasa, which means to lift up, to raise. Okay? Now, this is another idiom. They lifted up their eyes, wayira'u, and they saw, wahine, and behold. Just listen to that. Lifted up their eyes. First of all, did they really lift up their eyes physically? It's not necessarily the idea here. They hadn't dropped their eyes, okay? And you have after that a verb see, and after that hine. So they lifted up their eyes and saw and behold. That's a lot of redundancy. This is an idiom. It merely means they looked up and saw. They looked up and saw. All right? So then they sat down to eat food and looked up and saw a caravan, orachath, of Ishmaelites, Yishmaelim, Ba'ah, cal, active participle, feminine singular, agreeing with a feminine noun, orachat. All right? It's oracha in the absolute. Here it's in the construct because it's joined with Ishmaelim. And so it is, they saw a caravan of Ishmaelites coming, participle, Megiliad, from Gilead, Ugimalehem, and, notice there's a conjunction there, and their, T-H-E-I-R, because of him, third masculine plural pronominal suffix, their camels were bearing or carrying, nasa again, cal, active participle, masculine plural, nikot, this is one kind of resin, utsari, another kind of resin, walot, another kind of resin. 3 different kinds, 2 wows being used, and some translate the last one as myrrh, some translate the second or the first as mastic, resin, and myrrh, and you'll find some that'll have all 3 as resin. Some have suggested just translate as 3 kinds of resins because we're not certain what they are. But you should have 3 items there, however you translate it. Holkim is a cal, active participle, masculine singular, from halak. Masculine plural, excuse me, masculine plural from halak. It is not a hifil. It is a cal, participle, masculine plural, going, lehorid, a hifil, infinitive construct, from yarad, go down. It's a pay wow verb, or one wow verb, yarad. To go down, literally, mitzrayima, the hey locative on the end, to Egypt. That's how you know it's not Egyptians. It has a comet's hey on the end that indicates it's a location, it's a direction to, and so, and here the holakim lehorid, you just take the participle, combine it with the infinitive construct, and it just means going down to Egypt. Going down to Egypt. Questions? Yes, Chad.
There have been a number of idioms in this passage, and sometimes Holiday will tell us if it's an idiom, but sometimes he doesn't. Is there a good resource for that, or how are we supposed to recognize if it's an idiom or not?
On idioms, you're going to have to just learn them as we go along, and watch your translations as I grade them. I'll mark the idioms for you and tell you what they mean. That's the best way to do it, because at this point in time, the only good book on idioms that's available happens to be only in French at the current time. I have it on my shelf if you want to borrow it or use it, but there's just nothing available. Nothing available out there. Yes. So, all right, very quickly, let's take a look at Deuteronomy 5, 6, and following. In the last, I have 5 minutes left before we go to chapel. Let's take a look at this. Deuteronomy chapter 5, remember, is the 10 Commandments. That's your context. You're in the 10 Commandments. It's the second giving of the law. It was given in Exodus chapter 20 at Mount Sinai. Now on the plains of Moab, Moses is repeating the 10 Commandments. He's instructing the Israelites, and he's going to preach 3 sermons. And those 3 sermons are all going to relate to his exposition of the 10 Commandments. So in verse 6, Anoki Yahweh Eloheka, I am Yahweh your God. Remember, you have to add the verb to be, am, in there, because there is no other verb. Notice the zakef katon over Eloheka. I stopped there on purpose because we have to get that translated first. It's a disjunctive accent. I am Yahweh, your God. That's Elohim in the construct plus the second masculine singular pronominal suffix. Esher. Here by context, this refers back to Yahweh, therefore it's who, it's a person, not what. He's not a thing. Who, hotsetika, who I brought you. Very interesting. We're going to have to explain that. It is a hiphil, perfect, first common singular with a second masculine singular pronominal suffix. I brought you, me eretz, from the land of Mitzrayim, Egypt. Egypt, Mitzrayim, is a definite noun because it is a proper name. Therefore, eretz, being in construct, it's the land of Egypt, because as Mitzrayim is definite, so eretz is definite. It does not need an article on a proper name to make it definite. From the land of Egypt, mi beit, min plus beit. Beit is the construct of bayit, house, from the house of evadim, servants. From the house of servants means, it's an idiom, from slavery. From slavery. John?
In that verb and then throughout this passage, they're always using the second person singular to refer to Israel. Is there any significance to that?
There's great significance to that. It's brought out by Eugene Merrill in his New American Commentary on Deuteronomy. And that is that when it's spoken in the singular, it is directing this to individual Israelites, each individually responsible and accountable. True. Okay? All right? Now, how do we handle that first person verb there? Because it's inside the Asher clause. Because literally it sounds like this. I am Yahweh your God, who I brought you up from the land of Egypt from slavery. It doesn't make any sense in English. We don't say that. This is a peculiar construction in Hebrew, and what we do is we ignore the first person of that verb. We allow the relative clause to dominate. The reason it is first person is it has been attracted to the dominating force of this statement that it is God himself who is speaking, and he begins with this with anoki, I. And so it's attracted to that and it follows that, but you do not translate it as I brought you out. It's who brought you out. I am Yahweh your God who brought you out from the land of Egypt from slavery. Literally from the house of slaves. Lo yihye leka. Do not. Yihye leka. We'll come back and talk about that in a minute. Elohim echerim al panai. Elohim, gods. Echerim, other. How do I know it's gods with a little g and a plural? Because the adjective following it is also plural. That's your clue that it's not God with a capital G. It is gods with a little g and plural. Other. Acher means other. So other gods, al panai, before me, before my face, literally. Do not have for yourselves. Do not possess for yourselves. Do not gain for yourselves. Do not take for yourselves. This is the imperfect of the verb haya that has the idea of the state of becoming, of transition, and of happening. And in this context, with other gods as the direct object, you have to translate it by some other verb form. You cannot use be. You have to use something about possession or gaining. Do not gain, do not take, do not have other gods before me. And that is not just the idea of being in front of him, but some take that and interpret that as being prior to him, superior to him, in order before him in some way. All right? Now, as you go through the Ten Commandments, lo is the negative. That is the objective, permanent negative. It is the equivalent of saying never. It's the equivalent of saying never. It's not al. Al is the temporary subjective negative used for jussives and used in situations where you say, don't be afraid in this situation, but you might want to be afraid in another. But when lo is used, it means never. And so the 10 commandments here that are given use lo. All of them use lo where they're negative. It's a negative prohibition. They will use imperfects with them because the imperative does not take a negative. To say a negative or prohibition in Hebrew, you have to make it into an imperfect and then use the negative with it. So you'll find that all the way down. So it's don't make for yourselves, pesel, etc.